Chapter 33 Krieg Wind. That was what Brida had called Osrith when she had finally left the fortress at Taijui, that, should she meet her on the battlefield, she would turn from her. No greater honor was there than for a Danish warrior to speak of that to another. Brida had remembered. And Osrith had to remember that she had chosen to remain at Taijui. Yes, it was a vague agreement with Hyrule in exchange for the use of Ice Spite. Yet, as the wagons were prepared in Hyrule's courtyard, Osrith felt utterly alone. Yet, there was a familiar feeling about the fortress, a feeling of solidity, of belief stretching down into the earth, firm and broad and mighty. Christianity had come to the British Isles when the Romans were still here and had begun to spread. At Caerleul, in Ireland, in Cornwall, undisturbed by Saxons and Angles, it flourished, until Rome saw fit to send Augustine, who converted the Saxons in Cent and Wessex, and the Angles in Lindsey and Dirria. So the Cymric and the Say had a second strand to their enmity from 597, with more and more layers added over the decades. Pagans in Mercia would not convert and the Cymric tolerated them, not forcing the Irish Church on them, something which the Augustine Christians condemned the Cymric for. And that was before the Norse and Danes. To Osrith, politics and religion and geographical origin had intertwined, like a fallen wool loom, tangled, broken threads, knotted out of all recognition from the original pattern the loom master had intended for it. Their journey was going to take them north, into the lands of Anarord, king of Gwynedd, who was, Hyrule had explained to Osrith, going to meet them at an ancient holy site. "Do not fear, you are quite safe," he told Osrith. But Pylig did not sit outside her door at night, and once, when Osrith had wakened in the night, she could see the outline of a man hovering by the half-open door. "I would have felt safer aboard my ship," Osrith told him. "Could Angus not just have put in at Holywell and I could have met you there?" Hyrule had laughed at this, and shown her to the feast that night, which he was giving before the majority of the court, including his 3 sons, were to travel to Treffinan. Hyrule had found a place for her at his table, honored guest that she was. "I know it was you who set that Danish bitch free," Lydok whispered to Osrith, leaning over to her and pretending to fill up her water cup. "I will have you, pregnant with the King of Alba's child, or not." He salivated, his greasy grey hair dangling close to Osrith's face. "I will fill you up with my cock, and make you know what being humped by a Welshman is like." Lydok put a hand on her leg, and leaned over to her. "I too am very glad you are here, lady," he slimed, bunching up his hand but extending his middle finger, and rubbing it on her thigh, to imitate a peony. Osrith pushed his hand away, but he caught hers and drew it to his groin where a hard lump was forming. "Like what you feel?" Lydok asked, as he rubbed her hand hard across it. It pushed back insistently onto Osrith's hand. She turned to look at him. "Is there supposed to be something there?" she asked. Lydok threw her hand away, angrily. "I will hump you, lady," he promised her, growling at his face. "You will die trying," Osrith hissed back, angrily. "So much for safe." The seat next to her was taken and Osrith turned to look who had sat by her. "You are well, Osrith?" Pylig asked, at the opportune moment. With heavy gratitude, Osrith turned to him and nodded. Though a little tired, she told him. Beside Hywell, his 3 sons were engaging in an ever-escalating drinking competition. Rodri was winning, but Edwin was not far behind. Young Owain has passed out and was asleep across the boards. "Perhaps you could escort me to my room?" "Perhaps you could remain with me, in my room," Osrith clarified. When they reached it, Pylig gave her a long look. "Lady Osrith," he began, "it is not becoming of one in your position to ask a man, ask a priest to." Osrith sighed, choosing not to unpick whether he was serious or attempting a weak joke. "That will be because I have been propositioned twice this evening. It would never have happened if my noble lords has been with me," she added, feeling the irritation that her voice was conveying. "You promised no harm would come to me. And if Lord Lydok finds his way to my room again, harm is what I may come to." "I would defend myself," Osrith continued, "but I am somewhat disadvantaged currently." She put her hand to her ever-blooming stomach, and would have sworn that it had swelled several inches in the fortnight she had been at Deheubarth. "Understood, lady," Peleg said, his jovial demeanor changing suddenly. "I am sorry, too, that your men are not with us. One in particular?" Osrith thought, as she pulled furs over her, and Peleg buried himself in his cloak and hunched down by the door. The next morning, Hywel announced they were leaving the next day, and Lydoc was to play king as the king said, and Osrith was relieved to hear that such an odious man was not coming with them to Trefynan. "We are going by ship?" Osrith asked. Peleg shook his head. "Walking, although you may have a horse," he conceded, and the men did indeed walk, in robes of wool bleached in the sun, hair flowing down their backs, resembling what Osrith knew of the ancient Druid class, the intellectuals of pre-Christian society, that Paulinus had done his utmost to put to sword under a genocide over the whole of Wales. The Druid last stronghold had been Nicemun, Anglesey, and there Paulinus sent his men, through the shallows, to exterminate the last of them. Would he have come this way, Osrith wondered. Would Romans have trod this coastal route around this huge, curved bay, eliminating all of the ancestors of Hywel? Many said the ancients went to another peninsula, across the sea from Cornwall, and thrived, sending back Arthur, to be at odds with Vortigern, who had invited the Sayers mercenaries to help him. A week, the weather mild for November, for the winter comes later in this part of the world, and the landscape slowly changed, from tidal flats to wooded forests which gave way to mountains banked up on the northern horizon. Food was fish from the rivers they passed, with Lorand, a stew of a green-white vegetable Osrith had never tasted before, whose flavor was pungent and tangy, accompanied with soft round tubers that Hywel told her proudly only grew in the far west of Dyfed. All of these were supplemented with a hard, bread-like substance which took a deal of chewing but seemed to last the journey and kept well without weevils. Hywel's 3 sons entertained them each evening with a retinue of songs and poems, taking the time trying to outcompete one another with the most melodious lay or the longest story. Branwen was favourite again, as were the bastards say, and one night a familiar story of a different kind came to Osrith's ears, of a man called Cunedda who had come from Pitland and established the northern kingdom of Gwynedd. No, Osrith thought, for she recognized the theme from Engus and Phililim's boastful challenges on the ship as they sailed this coast, but in reverse. But a new name came to her ears, a connection that she had never made: Edwin, son of El, of Dyria, who has, according to his namesake, taken Nicemun and had named it after his homeland, the homeland of the Angel. They camped under stitched sheepskin, and Osrith insisted Peleg be next to her. He did not object, but lay well away from her. And Osrith slept well, and dreamed of people living here, tiny folk from centuries before, in balmy climes, protected by cold, high mountains, which she imagined to be caused invoked by the singing and storytelling. At an estuary to the west, where they camped and rested, Peleg told Osrith that they were now at the border of Gwynedd, Anarod's kingdom, and Osrith looked across the water, tracking another peninsula, where, she reckoned, Bardsea Island was. Anarod, who she had seen departing his ship though with others, while Engus looked on. As they moved on that morning, guards came out to meet Hywel, dismounting from horses not much bigger than the ponies of Guthard's Cumbraland, and stood before Hywel. They talked to the king for some time, before remounting and walking their mounts sedately beside Hywel. On escort, through the mountains, Peleg told Osrith, who was the only other person on a horse, to protect us from the mountain spirits and the dwarves and the dragons. In other words, the Scythe. Osrith thought, as their way rose up and ever upwards, for she had been able to feel them, and the Morrigan, as soon as they had passed into Anarod's kingdom. What was it tagged? Poor, beloved tagged would say. A king marries the Morrigan, for the is the land and the sea and the sky. And she appears to people chosen for battle, to warn them of impending upheaval and to be ready. But, what upheaval could there be here? Unless Hywel was going to attempt his takeover now, in which case he was without horses, men and supplies and was walking through Anarod's land. They passed a lake way down in the valley of a mountain nest, of a blue she had never seen, and mists seemed to curl about the mountains here as they rode upwards. It was colder now, and Osrith huddled in her cloak, and moved closer to Peleg that night for warmth, although he lay as still as rock as she nestled beside him. In the morning, a lammergeier, a huge vulture bird, swooped over them, which startled Osrith, who cried out as the bird skimmed close to her head, and she stared, open-mouthed, as the bird, bigger than an eagle, lifted an elderly ewe from a field and carried it off in its huge talons. "Sing, Osrith?" asked the king that night. Stars were overhead, the weather was fine, and Osrith shook her head. "Do you wish your animals to flee into the wilderness and the heavens to crack open with lightning?" Her rebuff was met with men's pooh-poohing of Osrith's denial that she would make a good Sinchai, and she might have been reasonable. But singing always made her sad, for she recalled Tagged, and his baritone voice stripping around them so often as they rode or walked anywhere with Domhnall and Constantine. Owain stepped in and sang a song of the Fae, the little people, a dragon, a hoard of gold and a magic ring. "We must put this by the fire," Peleg implored, when Osrith began to assemble under the sheepskin tent. "You cannot be that close to me, girl, even if you are great with child. You cannot," he added, a strangulation in his voice. But it was strange to Osrith that a man with children and who had urges with men would find her, all fat with a baby growing inside her, body plump and unappealing, no longer lithe and slim. Osrith could no longer bind her breasts. Where was the appeal? So she apologized for the liberty she had taken and spent the night almost sitting on the fire wrapped up between it and a tussock of grass, with Peleg denying she had to apologize while he settled to her left and the king to her right. In the morning, Osrith found Owain, Hywel's youngest son, shaking her shoulder, and looked at the world, a world with mountains behind them and wide green upland around them, falling gently to a coast about half a day's ride away. "We are going to be at Holy Well this morning," he told Osrith, handing her some of the everlasting bread. "Hywel, my father, has gone on with some of his men, and the other kings." "Come on," he encouraged. "Other kings?" Osrith asked, muzzily. "Oh yes," Owain enthused, happily. "Did you not know? Fanfail and Brogfail ap Murig of Gwent have been with us since Abergwan." Osrith did not know petty kings in tiny kingdoms. Yet, she knew of Gwent, for it bordered Mercia, Gloucester in particular, and she recalled Peleg saying many expatriates who frequented his alehouse had come from there. It made sense, it was just over the border. Whereas, Hywel's incursion into Gwynedd took him deeply into the land of his fellow king. "We are invited," Owain told her, brightly, "and our order extends an open, indefinite invitation to any pilgrim to Holy Well. We are fortunate we can get to it before the winter storms and snows." There was a pool, clear with Coll's spring water, flowing down a gentle incline which gathered in a rock depression in low-lying ground. A square of sandstone had been used to support the earth and the Welsh gathered around it, standing evenly at its perimeter. It had taken about an hour for the party to reach it, in bright, easy morning sunlight. Peleg drew Osrith's horse to a standstill and stood by her watching the men, as they held one another's hands. Around them, stakes of wood had been driven into the ground and on the trees linen strips had been tied. "People leave votive offerings, and prayers," Peleg told her, watching her look. "Oh, they are of the pre-Christian beliefs," he conceded, when she turned back to look at him, "but these are prayers to God," he added, raising a hand heavenwards, "and God receives all prayers, regardless of the manner in which they are presented to him." Her eyes were drawn to the men, who were singing now, hair soft gold down their backs in most cases, some of them age-whitened. Edwin and Rodri, Hywel's two eldest sons, had hair of chestnut brown which flowers past their shoulder like the rivulets of the holy water filling the well about which they stood, while Owain's matched his father's. Time passed, as Osrith watched the men, lulled by their chanting and humming, and she barely realized she had taken Peleg's hand when he offered it to her, helping her down onto the soft earth, leading her to the pool. "Fyrch wy Gwaidhelth," Hywel said, and Peleg replaced his hand with the king's, so she stood in the circle, 2. Plant Y Osrith, he added, and moved a hand over her stomach. Had she realized it, Osrith might well have protested at the right, but, looking back, she could not describe the feeling of it, except as completeness, as unifying. She was one with the land, her and Finan's child, and of the sky and of the water, and she placed her hands within the pool as Hywel invited her to, immersing her arms to her elbows. And then she saw him, not immediately, and more like a slow realization that he stood before her. Diffenwell, yet younger, shorter of hair and hazel of eye, yet pale golden blonde hair tumbled to his waist, and he had a merry good nature in his face. A king wishes to talk to you, Bailig told Osrith, and the men around the well drew together when she stepped away, like water flow converging when a rock has been passed. The morning's sunlight appeared to shine more brilliantly now, and the grass lush, like in high summer. Beyond them, a grey-green sea blended with hazy grey-blue sky, and a king stood, with the imperfect clone of Diffenwell beside him. "You are Osrith?" the king asked, and as he did so, recognition lodged in Osrith's mind. He had got out of the boat with his retinue at Bardacy Island, with this boy, too. "I am, King Anarord," she guessed. The boy looked up to the man, who nodded acknowledgement, and she realized something else, too. For all that Hywel said about her being kin to him in Deheubarth, this man was more her kin, descended far more directly from Urien. "Let us walk the coast path," Anarord suggested, and Osrith accompanied them, leaving Bailig standing and watching. "You are in my kingdom at last," Anarord said to her, "for I have been wondering about Gwythelth's child for so many years." "She died, did she not, birthing another Saxon child?" "Yes," Osrith agreed. "My brother, Hwygr, lives." "Hwygr," Anarord muses. "I have heard the name." "He rules Edwin's land?" Osrith paused for a moment and thought. "You mean Edwin, from many years in the past?" Osrith asked. "Son of El?" "Just so," Anarord replied. And Osrith realized how easy he was for her to understand. "Not for the king of Gwynedd the South Walleen tongue." Indeed, he spoke the words as if he had just met her beside the Forth, and she had come straight out of Dunnottar and turned to British settlement within its outskirts. "Time moves slower in my lands, we have few enemies to disturb us. Except for the Norse, who Flansinna has caused to be so desperate they must raid my fishing villages for as many piscod as they can lay their hands on. But I am lucky Hywel has settlement issues to deal with." "He is certainly unfortunate," Osrith conceded, as they drew up to slightly higher ground. Below them, the Welsh were still around the pool, now on their knees, praying. Bailig, she noticed, was over by her horse, patting its neck in a slightly distracted way. "And when he is unfortunate, he has less time to invade my lands and overthrow me," Anarord confided, leaning over to Osrith as if sharing a secret. The boy heard the king's words, but said nothing. "Especially when I brine them to, I am dying, Osrith," Anarord continued, noting the horrified look on her face. "My son, Idwell, who is praying for forgiveness and cleansing of the sin of killing, on behalf of all the men of Gwynedd, who you may see beside Rhodri," and Osrith glanced to see a golden-haired man on Hywel's left, would. He broke off, and the boy who looked like Diffenwell glanced up to King Anarord. "I sent some men to Woden'sfield, because whether Ethliad was my enemy, or the Wessexes, or the men of Deheubarth and Gwent, or whether they were not, the common enemy are the Norse." He drew close to Osrith. "Do you believe I would have anything to do with the bastard Mersons or the bastard Northumbrians, or any said, not after Augustine would not show his humility to our bishops, not after Edwin took on Augustine's teachings, not our own, after we shielded him and sheltered him from King Ethelfrith." Osrith nodded. What else could she do? Here was a man with little time left, who wished to speak to her, the past dripping from him like sweat on a boiling hot day. It was beyond her to get to the bottom of all of his nuances. Anarord sensed Osrith was being patient with him and leaned across to Osrith again, his pale hair shielding one side of his face. "Osrith," he said, softer now, "Idwell, my son, would yield to Hywel, to unite the northern and southern Wellies. And it makes good, rational sense, but that is because he thinks he has no other option. He knows I have one more card I could play. Why do you think he separated you from your men? He ventured. Because I agreed, in the use of a magic BL. She stopped because Anarord shook her shoulder. Whatever you think the reason is, think again. Anarord's face was lit up with eagerness, excitement, to convert something of vital importance. You came here with 3 warriors. Did you not? Osrith nodded. And how do I know this? Letter, treaty? Anarord laughed again. Because I arranged, or tried to arrange, for you to meet me at Nicenly, he told her, to meet my beloved grandson. Anarord put a hand on the shoulders of the boy with him, and thrust him a few paces forward. Owain, he told her. Owain Map Diffenwell. 88,888,888. Had she heard correctly? Osrith looked between Owain and Anarord for a moment, questioning her hearing. Map Diffenwell? Diffenwell made you welcome, did he not? Oh, dear yes, because he is such a kind-hearted man. He came to us, you know, when Eochaid was subdued by Domhnall. After the rebellion. He was so dire-cursed, was Diffenwell. So I treated him a son, the last of his line, of the Henoled. And he found out about you? Oh yes he did. Come, Anarord added, scooping his hand behind Owain and Osrith, ushering them along, as if the men 300 yards away would have been able to hear otherwise. So very aware of his responsibilities, Diffenwell, and the independence of Strathclyde. Which is why he courts the Norse. Oh yes he does. This is why Diffenwell tried to keep you at Glashku. Yes he did, the king continued, for the little parcel you nurture in your stomach, a potential heir, for he is unmarried. So he has no heir of his own, Osrith concluded, unable to help liking this king, so ebullient in his manner. And that's where he is wrong, you see. But Osrith saw something else, too. If Diffenwell had an heir, which, if Anarord was implying, was Owain, who was unknown to him, it stood to reason that Hywel wanted an heir to Strathclyde too. You have seen Diffenwell recently? How is his reign? Desperate, Osrith agreed. And does not know about his son? She smiled kindly down to Owain, who, like Hywel's Owain, must have been about 12 or 13. But Anarord did not answer. Instead he looked silently at Osrith for a moment. I would speak to you on the very delicate subject of your child, particularly its father, Anarord said at last. A gale, Osrith replied, warily, and Osrith saw that Anarord had raised his arm above his head. I am speaking to you as if you are my enemy, for the benefit of my own enemy, Anarord said. I will pretend to shout at you, kindly react in an appropriate manner. With his hand, he pushed Owain away, and she saw Hylem wink at the boy. Sorry? Osrith blinked, not following. I said, yield to me, Anglish bitch. Anarord shouted at her, raising a hand. Osrith, catching on, pretended to cower. Good, now listen, Anarord continued, pulling her roughly to him, his fingers, however, gentle, with no force behind them. Hywel would take my kingdom. Owain is the son of Diffenwell and son of my beloved daughter, Angarad, he added, and pushed her away with no force, and Osrith saw to it she flailed and stumbled. You are not, he shouted back to Osrith, then encouraged softly, come at me. Osrith withdrew tagged seeks, holding it low in front of her, but allowed the old king to knock her hand and the blade tumbled out of it, falling on the soft, green grass. He dragged her to him again, and Osrith laughed internally. They were noticed by Pylig, who was beginning to make his way up the hillock, slowly at first, and then quickening as he saw what looked like the king of Gwynedd assaulting her. Anarord hissed into her ear, my son is waits only for me to die to ally with Hywel, but my nephew is far stronger, with his Wessex allies, than I will with my armies. Hywel will not ally, but overthrow him and take all of the kingdoms of the Cymric. Next kingdom, Strathclyde, Osrith concluded, grimly. Owain? She asked. They would seek to destabilize Alba, place Owain on the throne to control a third of Constantine's realm, Anarord concluded. Now I am going to let you go, and you must shout back to that priest that you are well in for him not to come any further. Osrith did so. Pylig stopped running, and looked at her. The king will send me down to you unharmed, she added, translating that back to Anarord, but he answered, yes, in sign break faster than Osrith had time to finish. So he knew some English then, she thought, before turning to the king. What would you do, Osrith? Anarord asked her. Pretend to hit me, your grace. I would have done something unacceptable by now, like called you a liar, or the like. Anarord gave her a disbelieving look, then threw back his arm into a punch. Osrith moved away just in time to miss the impact, and his gloved hand skimmed her cheek. She pretended to reel and held her face. Take him with you, to Constantine. Osrith was pretending to get back to her feet, when she looked up, sharply. Anarord made to help her up, to show conciliation, and repeated them. And what would Owain want? Peace. And it can only be achieved by taking his heritage and moving on. He knows who his father is, and his responsibilities. Find a way back for him. Osrith looked to Owain Mab Diffenwell, who was smiling, and nodding. But Osrith shook her head. Not I. My agreed task was, yes, with Constantine. Anarord interrupted. I reject his offer. We have more in common with our neighbors than an ancient blood connection through a Pictish tribe, not even related to and certainly not the Gales. Tell Constantine, if he pursues his plans north, we will support the ruler of the land in any countermeasure. That is your official line? Osrith was catching on to this king's manner, stuck in the middle, little time left for influence. Unofficially, I imbue you the wisdom of our line. He should return here and learn of his culture from your family. Find a way to get Owain to safety before Hywel finds a way to eliminate him, or you. And Osrith found herself looking back into the face of a man willing to put the fate of 3 kingdoms into her hands, on the basis that she was one of only 2 heirs of the Henoled. She dropped to her knees now, and bowed her head. To anyone else it may have looked like submission, but Osrith was making a promise. I swear, kin of my mother, I will do all I can to retrieve Owain ap Diffenwell, she promised, placing both hands on tagged seeks, which she was making out she was taking back. The king of Gwynedd lowered his head. I accept your word, despite Hywel's lies. He seeks to court the Lady of the Mercens, he added, but his voice was rough, hard, and he took her by the elbow and threw her away from him. So that is where Ethelstan comes in, Osrith thought, as Anarord pushed her off in the direction of Pylig, and she remembered to hold her face where she had pretended to be hit. And Anarord was making himself deliberately louder now, from the kin of Ethelfrith the Twister, the bastard of Bernicia and the disease-ridden ferret Edwin of Dyria. I wish you damnation. Osrith hung her head, smiling to the earth, but looked up, concerned, and let Pylig take her arm. I am all right, really, she insisted, taking a glance back up the hill to the granite-expressioned Anarord. He really is a piece of a turd, Pylig replied, and made her sit down on a sheepskin fleece. What did he say to you? But Osrith shook her head. I have to get away from here, Osrith told him, and was surprised that she felt genuinely shaken. Will you ... will you ask Hywel what I need to do to fulfill his requirement of me, so I may meet my men? I cannot stay in Gwynedd, in Wellies any longer. 88,888,888. The prayers of the Welsh went on a day, and Pylig told her he would not move if she wanted to close her eyes and rest on the sheepskin while they waited for Hywel. And so it was the evening, at sunset, when Hywel, flanked by Pylig, came to her. And it was decided, as quickly as that. Hywel has asked her what she could offer, and when she told him, Osrith knew by his delighted expression, that it was more than he would have accepted. But it didn't matter, it was all she had. Tonight she would sleep in Gwynedd, and tomorrow, Hywel, Pylig and Osrith would cross the Dee to the Wirral. 88,888,888. I thank you for your hospitality, Osrith said to Hywel, when they got off the small ferry that took them from the tiny settlement dependent on eel fishing and over to, nominally, Mercia. She had looked, with hope, with willing, that her ship with Angus, Phelim and Eswine were where the king had said they were going to be. So, when she got out of the trap she was laying for herself, Osrith thought, that was the next thing to do, find the ship, and sail away from Wellies forever. They had not brought a horse and Osrith was slower than she might have been. Pilgrim assured her, however, that the bear they were going to was no more than 10 miles, which meant they reached Brunanburh in the late afternoon, the gold and green goose banner of St. Werburgh flying above it next to the Merson Saltaire. Well, you wished for information about Athelistan, Osrith told herself. Riley is, above the main fortress gates. A boy she knew from her pursuit of her brother peered over it. He was armed, which was good, but alone, which was not. Was Ethelfled really here? Because her plan would falter nothing if she were not. I have with me a prisoner for your lady Ethelfled, King Hywel told the guards. One leaned over, examining the faces of the visitors, and turned to another on duty. Athelistan, Osrith noticed, shifted towards the second man. To listen, it would be something she would do, if she were him. Minutes later and the doors were flung open, and Osrith saw the guard. A friend, a dear one. But she maintained the pretense. This warrior says she killed one of your lords, Hywel explained to an astonished Aldhelm. Under the treaty we have with the lady, Hywel continued, we have brought her here for justice. He did not put his hand, but his abrupt silence said the same thing. Payment was due. Lord King, Aldhelm said, inclining his thin, long neck as he acknowledged the King of Deheubarth. We were not expecting your army. And, nor should you, for I sent not my army. But, I can see you gave plenty of my uncles, the King of Gwynedd sends you. Hywel noted, as grey-cloaked warriors assembled within the walls of Brunanburh. I take it, your lady is here? Hywel added. Indeed, Aldhelm acknowledged and, with a swift look to Osrith, which she knew completely meant, what are you doing?